I'd like to pass the virtual stage over to you, Justin. And I thank you so much for taking time.
Yeah, of course.
You know, working from home or working from different spaces doesn't mean like there is so much time around that you don't know how to do with what to do with your day. I'm I'm happy to see you virtually,
Yeah, yeah, likewise.
and just love to pass that virtual stage over to you.
Cool. Thank you very much. Yeah, so to give you guys some background, first of all, Nikki and I have done this for now several years, and yeah, this will be my first time doing this virtual piece with Nikki, but I would do that a lot anyway, so I think it should be pretty easy. The second thing is sort of order of business. If and Nikki may have told you already, I'm a really easygoing guy, and if you know, I have a presentation because normally what I would be doing is a chalk talk. I would normally have just pieces of paper on the wall, and you know, and I would talk through something that would normally have been a presentation, but I would talk through it by drawing and so forth. Not as easy here, and I don't have a little pad or anything to draw on, so I have a slide deck instead. But what I thought I'd talk about today is business model shifts, and you know, the easygoing part is if you have questions about this as I go, just speak up and I'll stop and we can go backwards and forwards in any direction you want with this. My time is your time now, so we have about 50 minutes or so to go through this. But I thought I would touch on this topic of business model shifts because it's a very good time to talk about that. All times are good times to talk about that, but it's specifically and especially now. So just a really quick introduction to who I am and you know what I do and who you're talking to. This is a pre-COVID photo of me, quite obviously, because I can't get a haircut. I also decided to also not trim my beard either, just let them go and see what happens. And that's what's happening. But normally, this is what I would look like. And so I'm a strategy designer, so I help other companies design strategies and innovative business models and so forth. And also the managing director and partner of a company called Businessmodels Inc. US, and the US version of that. I live in San Francisco. What I like about this shelter at home, shelter in place thing is that I actually get to go outside a lot more than I used to, because I'm not taking immunity to the office or anything like that. I find myself going outside a lot. I live in an area in San Francisco with parks, and I just go to do a hike, you know, every few hours, and that suits me just fine. But outside of that, I have windows in the front and back of my house, and I'm always outside if I'm not inside.
And you can do the cold water swimming.
And I do some cold water swimming. So that photo here, this is where I do cold water swimming. Although now I'm not doing it because mostly because I can't use the little club next to it with the sauna. So I haven't been cold water swimming, but this is an area that you swim in San Francisco in something called the Aquatic Cove. It's a really, really cool thing. When you come back to San Francisco someday, this is a great place to swim without being eaten by sharks, of course. So I have a pretty long career in mostly big tech in Silicon Valley. I've lived here just about 20 years. I started my big tech career, and I had some before that, but I started by sort of my big tech career at a big company called Oracle. And I was there for a while doing just about everything you could possibly imagine, from sales and technical sales to software engineering, and then a big piece of it doing sort of product strategy. I left there for a startup that was eaten by another company, that was eaten by another company, eventually eaten by a giant Swedish holding company called Hexagon. Fun, not fun, but it didn't really matter. It was a really cool time to be alive and do lots of different things as part of the startup scene. And again, mostly product strategy. And then finally, I had sort of the last big corporate that I spent time at was a big company called Autodesk, which is a design software company, also doing all product strategy there. So today what I do, and this is now a bit more than 5 years, I run something called BMI, or Business Models Inc. US. And we are a global company. I just run the US side of it. but we're headquartered actually in Netherlands, so in Amsterdam, a lot closer to where you are. And we have offices in Taipei and Australia as well. And what we do, and this is why I think it sort of affords me some opportunity to talk to you today about business models and business model shifts, is that's what we do. It's really about designing and redesigning businesses. And so this isn't an ad for that. In fact, I just want to give you my perspective on what I see out there and how I see some of this stuff working and where I see things working as well. And it's a lot about co-creation. So to give you a chance, this is, we work mostly with large and, some medium-sized companies, probably like Intersport, West and up. And, the other thing is I'm also a writer. And so a few years ago now, 4 years ago, actually, we published a book called Design a Better Business, which I was an author on. And so this is about design and designing businesses. And today, in fact, just this weekend, we just sent our publishers the final, hopefully, draft of a new book called Business Model Shifts. And so I thought, well, let's incorporate some of what I've learned in writing these books and what we're doing here and give you a chance to sort of see some of this stuff in real time. To give you a sense, by the way, not only did we finish this, we actually finished this book a month ago, and with our discussion with our publishers, they came back a couple weeks ago and said, would you write a chapter about COVID-19 and like what to do now? And so we thought, oh yeah, we'll do that. So that's what we just finished. So a bit about this, and I structured what we'll talk about today and why, what, and how, and essential questions that any company, any business, ask themselves every single day, and especially now, right? Why do anything? What should we do, and how do we actually do those things? So why? Why are shifts so relevant? And every single day we see this. Business as usual is dead. It doesn't mean that the businesses themselves are just dying because they are dying. It means that business changes, and irrespective of where we are today with shelter in place and COVID-19, that business models change, and when they don't change, they die. And it's not often, it's always when they don't change, right? And every day I definitely see dead companies. And so, while I'm often brought in early enough that we can help do some really interesting and amazing work with our clients, just as often, I might be brought into something or oversee something where it's like, this is dying, and sorry guys, it's time to have a funeral instead. And here, this is a pretty well-known artist and graphic designer, a guy named Ure, and here's some logos he came up with for businesses that he thinks are sort of dying in this time of COVID, right? And it's true. What we see here are some of these companies are just not doing nearly as well as they could have done had they set themselves up for success in different ways. And so whether it's Corona Beer or Starbucks or the NBA, the National Basketball Association, or the US Open, right? And you see these logos, and this is not a joke, right? These are companies that even, that even before were doing well, but hadn't set themselves up for success. And of course, the rate of change is exponential. It doesn't stop. And so while we may end up outside of this, this world that we live in today in a really interesting spot, it doesn't mean that it won't keep changing and change again, right? And so our big challenge then is, how do we actually change with the world? How do we keep pace with the world and do all the things that we may need to do to set ourselves up for success now, but in the next version of now, and the next version of now, and the next version of now, knowing that change is exponential. But also, the global center of gravity is shifting, right? So whereas, we used to think of Europe and the US as sort of dominant players in everything and serving the core set of customers, it so turns out that that's faulty logic today. A lot of this shift has been moving away from what we do here in the US and Europe to places like India. And so you see this, right? You see things like this, and these articles are a little bit older, but whether it's bike shares or scooters or some other business model, we're seeing sort of wholesale copying of what we do into new realms, into new geographies, and they end up doing really well in many cases, and had some totally different abilities, but also serve and service whole new sets of customers that often I think we don't necessarily think about. The second part of that is customers are more empowered, right? So this is why do anything. Every single day, we as customers, definitely here and definitely in this time that we're living in at this very moment, you find that we're really empowered to do things ourselves in ways that perhaps we hadn't thought about, or maybe we weren't empowered to do before. And so things like legal support. Here I run this business in the U.S. and we do lots and lots of business with big corporates. I don't work with lawyers anymore. I actually haven't worked with lawyers in a long time, except for immigration type things where I have people coming from outside of the country. In fact, everything I do is through things like Rocket Lawyer, right? So the shift has moved from me having to work with expensive lawyers to me actually being able to do most of everything I do when it comes to legal things on my own, right? In mobility, from ownership to pay when you need it, right? And this is certainly a lot of, I think, what you do, having also rented snowboards from Intersport at St. Anton, right? I know this is a big part of what you do. Pay when you need it. You don't need to have the best Burton snowboard every time. You could go get the best from the shop, right? But you also see this in shopping, right? From physical 9-to-5 stores to 24/7 shopping to delivery, which is definitely what we're doing right now, certainly here in the US, to even designing things so that things can be dropped off directly into your home or wherever you actually need it. To, of course, no, I need it right now, right? And here's a Chinese website. When you need a divorce, you click this button and you go ahead and you get your divorce. But the third thing, and when it comes to change and comes to why do anything, is there's this omnipresent technology out there. And here's what I mean, right? Technology is everywhere, but it's more and more that technology is hidden, and it's enabling us to do things that we couldn't do before, right? And so things like artificial intelligence, right? We have these phones and we have our laptops, but we have coffee makers and everything else that now are listening and waiting and can do things on command, but also start doing things on behalf of what we actually need and want. And when you pair these technologies with other technologies, blockchain or whatever the buzzword of the day is, when you pair these things together, all of a sudden, everything changes, and you get to pair technologies with service models, with the way people actually want to get things done for themselves without interacting with humans in many cases. Everything changes because you have now all of the seeds needed to create some new shift in your business. But of course, we also have to find ways to solve things like this, right? So pollution, we take from forests, right? We make these things in factories. When we throw them away when we no longer need them, and of course we set them on fire and things like that. So here are all these fundamental reasons we might want to change from a consumer perspective, and then of course there's other reasons we may want to change because it happens that, well, we're not always the most sustainable beings on the planet. So there's a lot of reasons to change, and I think most people who I speak with, they come to me because they already know the reasons they want to change their companies. But what? Like what can we actually do about change? What can we actually do to affect change? So when we think about here at Businessmodels Inc, when we think about change, especially in a business context, it isn't actually about the new technologies. It isn't actually about just what our customers may need and want in now or in some imagined future. In fact, it's always about the business model, the underlying business model, which is what can we or what can you as a company do to your business model to shift that business model to create, deliver, and capture value in new ways and continue to do that. And in other words, if there's some edge of innovation, if there's some very edge of the places you should play with your business model, how can you actually go through the appropriate shifts and basically train yourselves up and undergo undergo constant shift of your business and constant new business models and creation and so forth, how can you actually do that? And this is what we think about every day. Again, it isn't just about technology. It isn't just about what customers need and want now and in the future. It's about creating the new foundations inside of our business models and redesigning those to always take hold of those, to always have something to say, to always create, deliver, and capture new value. So where then is value created, right? And these are questions we have to answer. And how might we solve these big problems in our companies? And we do this via something called business models. Now, I mean, I'm going to widen my screen real quick so I can see all of you, and you can't see me changing my screen. A show of hands, how many people have heard of something called the business model canvas? So 1, 2, and some of you have your cameras off, so I'll assume there's maybe 2 or 3 of you, maybe a couple more that have seen this. So a business model canvas, I'm going to use this construct to show you a few things here, and I don't have a lot of time to go super deep into it, but I use something called a business model canvas in some upcoming slides to basically discuss and have some context to talk to you about what is in a business model. Suffice to say that a business model is built of not just the pricing, the revenue model or something like that. It's built of all the things you need operationally to create value, the value propositions that you're actually, sending or selling or renting to your customers, and that's value delivery. And then also the value capture or exchange you have with your customers. So it's the whole ecosystem that you use to discuss what it is to do the business you're in, right? And so that's a business model. And when we think about business models then and business model shifts, here at BMI, we've really done a lot of work here and done a lot of research. And what we found is that irrespective of the organization you work in or the field that you do business in, the industry and so forth, the geography, at the end of the day, there are 6 fundamental business model shifts that you can go through. And of course, you can merge and mix them as well. And so here are some of the ones that we found, and then I'm going to go deep into just one of them, but we can talk about any of them if you like. So some of the business model shifts then, when you think about business modeling, are these. One is we call this pipeline to platform, and I'll give you an example. A really well-known example would be Apple. Apple is started off its life as delivering hardware, right? Pipeline of hardware. In other words, it would work with some global supply chain partners around the world. It would, develop new Macintosh computers, and before that, Apple IICs and computers and things like that. And even after that, things like iPods, and would develop these things in-house. It would work with global supply chain partners, and then just sell these things out the door, right? And of course, it still does a lot of that. However, what you may or may not know, and you probably do, but you don't really think about it this way, is Apple has fundamentally shifted its future and its future revenue sources, major revenue sources, from not just selling hardware. It still does that, but actually the company believes and is increasingly proving that this is true, that it's going to make most of its revenue streams off of platforms. And those platforms might be like the App Store, the news, Apple News, it's the bookstore, it's their music with iTunes, and now really it's the Apple streaming services, it's their Apple Plus movie and television services. And so as you start to see the world of Apple, and you think, well, they're really just about cool iPhones. In fact, the iPhone is only the way to capture all of this stuff. It turns out the iPhone for Apple, while it's still a huge revenue stream, it's not betting its future on iPhones, it's betting its future on platforms. And what are platforms fundamentally, but actually creating a place where consumers can show up and producers can show up on the other side, and then Apple gets in the center of that and connects us and allows consumers to consume the things that producers produce. And then Apple is just an intermediary and can scale this exponentially. There's also business models from physical to digital. Now, I realize you're also in a very physical, I think in probably in most cases, if not every, a very physical business, having rented from you before, probably at several different places, right? It's about physical goods, but also you should realize that there's a lot of digital in physical nowadays as well. So this is one I put in here specifically for you. Disney. Now, Disney is not just Disneyland, of course, and Disney World, and then all the Disney properties. But even in its physical places, Disney has started to implement digital strategies. And these digital strategies are not about just, getting rid of a bunch of employees or something like that and enabling people to just do their own thing. But actually, it's enabling their employees to be smarter and know more about where people are, for instance, inside of Disney parks, and carrying stories from the moment someone actually looks up Disney content or decides they're going to go to Disneyland or Disney World properties around the world. The moment they do that online, carrying a storyline through all the way to the park, all the way to the hotels, all the way to the food, to the restaurants, all the way back home, so that the people who are connecting with Disney never forget. In fact, they're carrying that reality from digital to physical, back to digital to physical, and so forth. And so with something called My Magic, this is exactly what Disney does. And this is a whole set of services, digital services, that Disney has enabled inside of their parks, online, inside of hotels, restaurants, and everything else, that carry a storyline all the way through and carry their customers all the way through forever, right? And of course, it makes things really simple for its customers too. And so this is a really interesting, I think, example of physical to digital, but also physical and digital together. And that's a shift. Other companies like Unilever are going through something called a stakeholder shift. And this is from shareholders to stakeholders. What's meant by this is, when you think about Unilever, for instance, what this means is that whereas many companies, are really focused on its shareholders and providing shareholder value, quarterly reports, maybe they're bi-yearly or yearly reports, and making sure they're really paying dividends or improving the revenue of the company and the margins and everything else. What this is all about, and this stakeholder shift, is really not moving away from that totally, but actually broadening it and saying, you know what, all stakeholders matter, not just our shareholders and our investors as stakeholders, but our employees as stakeholders, but our customers as stakeholders, other partners as stakeholders, investor community as stakeholders, and the globe as stakeholders. And when you do that, what you end up seeing, and what Unilever is certainly seeing here, is that by investing its own company's resources in lots of different areas that are not just about improving shareholder value, but improving the health and wellness of the communities, improving the globe, improving the employee, sort of employee experience, for instance, all of a sudden the company is seen better and actually is doing a lot better than it would have otherwise, and in the past, just focusing on its shareholders. And again, you can even start to see these things go together. The fourth shift we see is something called singular to circular, and it kind of goes along with that shareholder one in many respects. Singular to circular kind of goes like this. Rather than make waste products, what if you could actually take from and recycle products to make things with those, to reuse those things, to put them back into the stream, to keep reusing and reusing and reusing things over and over and over again until they're really, really done, and then find another use for their constituent parts. Now, again, very much this is what I think Intersport does, right? Because you have a service business model, in most cases, you're renting things to people and they can be reused and reused and reused, rather than me buying a brand new Burton snowboard, which I bought a couple of years ago, and only using it so often and then eventually getting rid of it, right? I could actually be sharing that out with other people. There are companies like Nike who do this, and Nike's got something called Nike Grind, which is, while it still sells Nike shoes and to consumers like me and perhaps you, it has a program where you can go back to Nike, drop those shoes into a basket, and it will take those shoes and not just maybe not give those shoes away. In fact, it tears those shoes apart to take their constituent parts and then reuse them into brand new shoes, and sometimes take those materials and actually sell those materials to completely other markets. So in some cases, Nike tears apart shoes and then sells the rubber and other parts for use in tracks and building like running tracks and running paths and things like that. When you look at it that way, all of a sudden you realize, oh, that's really interesting, because it costs money for Nike to take these shoes and tear them apart, but actually it makes a ton of money selling those resources back to someone else. In fact, it's able to use its lost resources to make new resources to sell to someone else, and this is called a circular shift. We also see shifts from linear to exponential. And linear to exponential is probably a bigger shift, is a little bit different. And I think probably Nikki's spoken to you about this or will speak to you about this. But the idea of linear to exponential is, how do I use my business model and the resources of my business model and the different pieces of my business model to create exponentiality, to create exponential growth, because my business model actually creates exponential growth inside of it. I think a really interesting case study here is Netflix. Now, while yes, we all think of Netflix as being an online-only company, it's been around for a long time. It turns out, of course, it wasn't an online-only company for a long time. In fact, it started off its life as shipping DVDs. But it's turned into an exponential company because this company has algorithms inside of its business model and inside of the technologies inside of that business model that churn through and understand what people want and need, which feed back to people, which feed back to us, to the people who want and need things. So they give us recommendations for new things to watch and change the screen layout for us so that we find the things maybe that we want or find new programming. But also it enables Netflix and producers, for instance, of new shows to see all the trends for all the things that people watch and all the times they push pause and everything else, which enables Netflix to produce different shows and even to find other producers and content creators to put back on the platform. And so it's able to gamify everything, and it's very exponential. The company actually just goes and has gone through exponential growth because it uses its business model to fuel its exponential growth, and it uses things inside of its business model that it knows well to do that. And the final shift, the sixth one, is something called products to services. And again, I think this is one that you're a part of, but I thought I'd go a little bit deeper into anyways. So there's a lot of product to service shifts out there, and perhaps there are some that you can consider here as well. Philips, right? So, somewhat local here in Netherlands. For a long time, Philips sold commercial lighting. And at some point in the, not very long ago, only several years ago, less than a decade, it turned off its commercial lighting sales division and turned it into something called Signify, which is lighting as a service. And you can imagine it this way: when you think about retailers, but also big warehouses and commercial spaces, Philips doesn't want to sell you lighting anymore, as in lighting fixtures and light bulbs. Philips sells you lighting. What's cool about this business model is it looks at its core customers, commercial entities, and says, hey, your job as a commercial entity is to do whatever business that you're in. But clearly your job is not to fix the lights. You just need lights to see your way, or to show your customers something new, or whatever it may be. And so Philips saw this need and has turned on a new business model called Philips Signify, which is lighting as a service. What's happened here in this is Philips, well, first of all, Philips takes care of all the lighting in a commercial space, replacement of light and everything as well. But in doing that, Philips also has created long-term customers that, instead of paying per light bulb and finding new commodity ways to exchange light bulbs, actually just pays Philips as a utility, more or less, to keep the lights on and to do this really energy efficiently. And of course, Philips has found whole new revenue streams in doing this. You see the same thing from car manufacturers, auto manufacturers. BMW is doing this, right? So Access by BMW, and now it's also got new services in corporation with its biggest competitor, Daimler, where they're actually starting to see that it's more profitable in many cases to rent cars than to sell cars. And finally, even here, we see jeans, right? Denim jeans as a service. And there's a company also in Europe called Mud that's doing denim jeans as a service. It turns out that this is not only things that are happening and have been happening now for years. It turns out that here's a recent-ish article, so now almost a month ago, that I found that I put in here, that it turns out that lots of people are thinking that these as-a-service models will really reign supreme in sort of the post-pandemic world. The key here is that people aren't always going to need things that they want to keep and have, and hold close to them. They're going to need things when they need things, and they're going to want companies to actually take care of their needs and their jobs in some way. And so how can we actually do that, right? So what does this actually look like? And so here's a place where I'm going to give you another example, and then I'm going to pull up a business model to show you what it looks like to go through this kind of shift. So in this example, this is a company called Medtronic, and I brought this company in, of course, because it's COVID-19 and everything else, but also because I think it's a really interesting example. So Medtronic, another European company, and Medtronic is a manufacturer of medical devices and equipment. And for a very long time, Medtronic, and in fact, I think in the late 1800s, Medtronic had been selling, early 1900s, had been selling medical devices and medical equipment to hospitals and doctors and everyone else. At some point in its life, it realized, and the company's managers realized, that it's not about selling equipment. And in fact, it's a lot better to partner with your customers, to have them using equipment and partnering with them, not to sell equipment, but actually to improve outcomes. When you think about a doctor's job, the doctor's job is not to use a specific piece of equipment, but only to do so to improve the outcome of something else, to improve the outcome of a surgery or some other procedure that's happening, or just the hospital in general. And so whereas Medtronic, and this is now again a business model canvas, Medtronic used to sort of sell life-changing high-end products and tools and resources to go along with those. And it used to focus on patients indirectly, right? Building products that would go inside of patients or connect with patients, and would used to sell specifically to healthcare professionals, doctors, and administrators, and everyone else. It would do so in a very direct manner, and it would keep customer relationships alive. It would keep sort of its engagement with the healthcare professionals alive by presenting new value propositions, by writing papers, by showing up at conferences and everything else, talking about how its products and procedures and everything else would relieve pain or restore health or extend life or whatever. And of course, at some point in time, now this is only a few years ago, Medtronic would get all of its revenue from product sales. It would sell a specific machine and it would get revenue from that. And you can imagine its key resources in doing all this stuff were factories and warehouses, and it would use a lot of the resources to do engineering, design, and production. It would partner with health authorities and payers and patient organizations. And of course, its underlying cost structure was lots of R&D and people and marketing and sales and all the other things. So this is a business model, and this was Medtronic's old business model. But today looks a lot different for Medtronic, which has moved mostly from this product-centric business model to a service-centric business model. So now its value propositions are quite different. It's about enhancing operational performance, right? It has machines, it's the same equipment, but actually it's about operational performance, improved patient experience, and the devices you need when you need them, always on demand. It actually does so, and it sells services now to healthcare providers and hospitals as well as physicians. The reason for this is because the hospitals manage the margins, the hospitals manage the outcomes, and the physicians are part of that structure in managing outcomes. And so now Medtronic goes directly to hospitals and healthcare providers as well. It uses its channels in a different way now. In fact, it goes directly, certainly, to physicians and really the healthcare providers, but it uses case studies and research that it develops alongside physicians to help the case for using its equipment and using it in a rental basis. And it does so in a complete partnership with its customers. In fact, Medtronic more or less gives the equipment away, and you only pay for outcomes of the procedures, right? And so it's kind of like it's kind of a no-risk business model that Medtronic runs today. So it's predictable fee per procedure, right? You do pay per procedure, and it shares some risk in that. If the procedure doesn't go well or a machine breaks down, it shares risk in that. It has long-term contracts, which it sort of enables as part of its relationship to keep this stuff going all the time. Again, you're not buying these machines anymore. Its key resources now are expertise and knowledge. Its activities, it tailors solutions and back office operations. So it's not just the machines, but it's operations in the back end to make sure there's always performance. It does so by partnering with the internal business that builds devices, but also financiers who actually finance putting these machines in hospitals where the return is probably going to be at some later point in time. And of course, it also now has a whole new cost structure because it actually goes to hospitals and helps to manage the operation rooms and the facilities and labs, and puts experts in hospitals to make sure that it always gets the outcomes that they need, really in true partnership with its customers. So this is a huge shift for a company like Medtronic, and you can see those things happen in this construct of a business model. Our point of view then is that you must focus on providing customer job-centric services, and probably digitally in many cases as well. And so when we look at a business model again, then we think about these shifts, here's what that actually means. If we have a business model like this where we're selling products to mass market, to businesses, and people are paying per unit, right? And we've got retail channels and transactions and so forth, where we end up needing to go is products with, where we used to sell products, now we need to sort of sell experience and sell the things that people, or rent the things, or produce or provide the things that people need as part of that experience. And that may mean all the things that they need as part of that experience. And where we used to go from retail channels, it might mean that we own all these things. And much like I think you at Intersport own a lot of the, those things that you're providing as part of the experience. You might go from one-time transactions to long-term relationships based on data. And this is technology comes into play, and digital certainly comes into play. You probably move away from some paying per unit to paying per use, or paying per performance, or paying per experience, or paying for something else that people weren't paying for before. And of course, you go from having facilities and production facilities to really the key here is data. What data can you own that's actually going to drive everything else and drive how you produce the value that people are actually going to use and pay for? You also go from this production and marketing to fleet and asset management. Again, something I think you probably know well. And you go from controlling your supply chain to working with partners with some shared ambition. And finally, from materials to finance and technology, and of course, accounting for all the impacts along the way. And so this is a way to think through shifts, and a way to think through business model shifts. And of course, you can design all the patterns you need to do that. And I think, again, this is something you probably do, but also something now you can think more deeply about. But in every single case, in order to go through any kind of shift, whether it's now or later or in some imagined future, the key with all of this is that you have to first understand your own current business model. Just the way I showed you Medtronic and its current business model, it wasn't able to get to a future business model until it understood the current one. So I have just a little bit more, but before I go on, I wanted to see if anyone had questions or comments or wanted me to go more deeply into something. I'll pause for a moment.
I have to say I love it.
Thank you. Tell me more. What do you love about it?
I always enjoy the conversation with you, but this is the difference from process to mindset.
Yeah, this is a mindset shift. Cool.
We
Yeah.
spoke so much about process, but actually now we're having a conversation about mind shift, and
Yeah.
exactly the conversation we need to have, because
Cool.
technology doesn't get us anywhere, and processes are good to have, but it's actually the way we think is the way we determines where we're going and where we're capable of going.
That's right, right. And knowing that there are frameworks and things out there that you can look at. You don't have to invent everything from scratch. This is about, hey, there are lots of patterns in the world. What patterns might you take and then fit Intersport things into those patterns and see how you might make your own changes. So good. I'm glad that works. So now I want to dip just for a few minutes in, because I know we only have about 13 minutes left. I want to dip into sort of how do you do this? And I'll be relatively quick about this. So how might you design shifts? Like how do you actually make this stuff happen? And again, I speak about business models and other things. But I want to sort of just kind of dip in. What does this actually mean? What does it mean to create a shift? Because you don't do this just out of thin air. It takes real work. So in my mind, there are just like everything else, there's just a few steps to get there. I think here I've got 3 steps. First and foremost, you've got to design, or utilize design-led processes to get there. And this is a graphic that Nikki knows really well, that I've shown lots of different times, and I've drawn on my wall innumerable times. The idea is that you don't just come up with an idea and then bake that into a strategy in a straight line and expect that thing is going to win the day. It doesn't work that way anymore. And that's because if we don't know who our customers are, if we don't know what they need and want, and if we don't take small steps to try new things, we're going to fail, and we're going to fail really big, and that's not going to feel good. So why not fail at very small times, but really call those learning moments? So in order to actually do something different in the world, it's not about one single option. It's about creating lots of options. And in creating lots of options, the first thing you'll probably want to do is understand the world around you, understand your customers, understand what's going on with the climate, understand the partners you work with, understand your current business model, its context, as much as you can about future context, what might happen in some imagined future. If you can understand and start to understand what's going on around you, then you can also start to ideate or create new options for the future. The idea with ideation then is that there is no single right solution for the future. There is no single right solution for the future. There are only many, many options, and it's up to you to figure out which options are right for Intersport now, tomorrow, and in some imagined future, right? What options might be viable? And so ideation is about bringing different people together to create lots of options so that you can find a few that might be good options. Then it's all about prototyping. How can I very quickly test some of those options and maybe validate some of those options along the way, right? And some people call this failing fast. I think of this not as failing. I think about this as learning in a very, often in a closed environment, in a safe environment. But how can I test some of my new business model options, validate those business model options? And all along the way, in this sort of double looping structure that kind of looks like an infinity sign, it's always improving and engaging and sort of giving me a new point of view about things, right? And so here I'm actually improving my point of view and informing my point of view so that I'm no longer going with one strategy into believing that I can scale it to something new exponentially, but I'm going with many, many options, testing a few of those options, and through engagement, prototyping, and validation, I'm informing my point of view about which ones might work now and tomorrow and in some imagined future, right? And so the first thing, this is design, and this is design thinking 101. The second thing then you must do, and if you really want to scale this forever, it's about scaling design and innovation inside of your organization. And this is a little bit harder to do because it takes real work. It's not just following this simple structure with a small team. If you want to scale constant shifting, it all starts with sort of a big ambition and really some big vision that you see in some imagined future. Like, look, we can't just be about this, just these couple sports in just a few locations. We want to be this to people in some imagined future. We want to grow this company to some size in some imagined future. And so it starts with a very strong vision at the core of your organization. If you can do that, then it's also about setting up your organization so that it also understands that strategy, that ambition, that vision, and it's also set up to do something about it and perhaps is measured to do something about it. But it's also then about teaching people in the organization, giving them and teaching them new capabilities and this whole new shifting and design mindset so that they no longer think about single right solutions, so that everyone starts to think of things in design and starts to think of things in a new way, like, hey, there are options. How do I test my options? How do I work with others to do that? And it's a whole new set of capabilities and a whole different mindset, but it's totally teachable. Because you also have processes and tools that you can employ there to do these things. And now it's about not only teaching these things, but bringing in new processes and tools to take these on. But also using metrics in a way that you measure your progress in different ways, that you measure what you're doing and new capabilities and probably even new ideas. You measure the outcomes in different ways than you measured before. But that also means that you use your resources and fund things differently than you did before as well. You invest your money differently internally anyways, in ways that you probably don't do today, or maybe you expand them in new ways, right? So this is very much changing the way you do things to always constantly shift. And of course, for different companies and different industries, there are different strategies and different ways to look at things, and you probably want to look at things differently yourself. What I mean by that is sometimes you may be wanting to look at new core offerings and business models, right, that are just existing in what you do today. Other times they're adjacent. They may be new to you, but just inside of your industry, but still kind of new to what you do. And in other cases, they're brand new industries, brand new customers, and you have to sort of decide where do you play at different points in time. And finally, number 3 is this. Again, I always mention there's no single right solution. And Nikki's heard me say this literally thousands of times, because I don't believe that there is a single right solution. In fact, I know in my heart there's no single right solution for anything, even in math, by the way, right? There's no single right solution. There's only options, and it's up to you to find the right options for you, right? But that also means when you're creating new business models and you're creating your own shifts, that you also start to set up a portfolio of all of the things that are going on at Intersport. What I mean by that is that you have things that you're testing out that are about value creation, but you're only testing them. They're not things that you're going to roll out fully in some giant corporate strategy that's going to go to every single place that you play. They're early and you're testing them. And then there's also growth parts of your strategy where you have things that you know work. They're in maybe every single place that you operate, and now you're trying to grow these things in different new ways. And when we think about business models then, and that this simple tool that I showed you, but I didn't go really deeply into, you can also set up in different engagement models and different ways of testing in their portfolio what's happening. And so at some point, you're probably in that portfolio. There are things you're just trying to learn about. Is this idea even worth doing? At other times, you're trying to build, hey, we think it's worth doing, but can we build something out of this? And other times you're trying to grow, and other times perhaps you're trying to optimize what you're doing. What's cool about that is just like in any other diversified portfolio, it means that you could have a whole set of different business models, all these dots being different business models. You could have a whole set of different business models that at any point in time you're managing, and you know where they are as a team. You know where they are, and you're able to provide the right resources to help those business models get to the next level, or drop them or kill them totally because you have other ones you're working on as well. So you're diversifying your approach in a portfolio and understanding where things are in a portfolio, so that at any point in time you can decide what to do next, but never have one single strategy you're weighing on. You can gamify this approach for yourself. And in doing that, you're systematically also de-risking all of your new ideas, de-risking all the new strategic approaches and shifts you may take. But you can do that then through metrics. And so I think about metrics in this way. Metrics then, if I'm taking a portfolio approach to managing business models, what I can do then is say, hey, in the business models that are part of my learning stage, I don't really care how much revenue they're bringing in, because I know it's not going to bring in a ton of revenue, especially compared to the things that I've got going on that are in growth mode or optimized mode. But what I care about is, I want to know how many people out of all the ones we've engaged with, how many are actually engaging with some of these new things? Maybe they're not paying a lot of money, but they're engaging in new ways. What can I do with that? In build, then I maybe sort of, I'm measuring a percent of repeat customers or the lifetime value of customers, right? It's very different. At some other point in growth, I'm sort of got some other penetration rates or something else that I'm measuring. But along the way, I'm not measuring the same things in my portfolio. New things I'm measuring very differently than things that are already existing in my portfolio. And in doing that, I can even set up stage gates so I know when something crosses the chasm, it's time to actually bring that to a next phase, maybe infuse it with some money and now measure something different, right? But then I can also just determine along the way, not only which things grow and which things am I going to optimize, but also am I going to amplify, but also which ones I'm going to sustain and which ones eventually I'm going to let go of or pull their constituent pieces back into my business model in some other way, right? In every single case, then, this is also applying the right funding approach, knowing that, by the way, most of us fund things like this, right? We fund most everything. We put all of our money into sort of core and just a little bit into adjacent and just a tiny bit into transformational, but then knowing, and there's tons of data to back this up, that your return in some future state, often 70% of your return comes from the transformational investments you make. And so how do you balance the funding with the metrics with this portfolio approach and making all of these different shifts at different times? And again, you can gamify this as well by looking at the different metrics as part of your business model shift portfolio. You can then apply different funding to those as well. So you just give a little bit at the beginning because you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. Maybe you have 10 different business models here that you're going to test. You're going to, let me give each one $1,000 and see if what they can do with $1,000. If all of a sudden they cross that gate and it looks like they're showing promise, maybe it's 2 out of the 10 that are there. But 2 show real promise. Give them a little more money, right? And another gate. And they keep crossing, and eventually you're going to find the matriculation falling through here, and you're going to find the best bets are going to actually be able to go through these gates pretty well. So that was a lot packed into, really just about 50 minutes here. And that was the why, the what, the how, and all really with this business model shift mindset. And I'm glad, Dieter, you brought that up. So that's really it. I think we have about a minute for questions or anything else, but I figured I'd also give you a chance. If you want to connect with me, we can also connect offline. I'm always happy to give you time and give people time to talk. I'm a cosmic karma kind of guy anyway, so always happy to help in any way I can. So with that, of course, that's all for me. We can open it up for a question. I don't know if we have any more time here, but thank you for giving me some time.
And thank you. We thank you so much, Justin. That was amazing.
Well, thank you.
It was a first for me. I'm not sure if it's a 2-digit amount, the amount of times we've seen each other.
Yeah.
And that was new to me, and it's really great. Usually that would be the time where all of you, so I would walk around the table, go to a shelf and take a handful of yellow books and put them on the table. So Justin, you have to let me know what's a good channel of distribution. So there are 3 books that people, or 2 books that people love to have, and that's the Better Business Models, Design a Better Business.
Design a Better Business, yep.
And the other one is the Business Model Generation, which is the school book of MBA classes. And here's a new one. Our gift to you guys is to have one of these books. So I can have them sent to Dieter and you distribute, but it's also fine to have them sent to all of you guys. I just need to collect some. And I guess I can order or pre-order on Amazon, or you've just shared that URL. That's a gift to have this, to have an experience that you can, a tangible experience out of this hour, out of this meeting. Up to you. For us, we have 2 sessions a day, so we're probably maybe more open with time than you are, Justin. So you have to. I can be marshal of times at things and cut.
Yeah.
But
I do have to jump to another call here. But why not? Yeah, I think if everyone here, you know, think about what I said. I'm happy to sort of, again, I'm always happy just to talk and connect and help in any way I can. Free. I mean, I know that eventually what comes around goes around. So I will leave you with that. Nikki, you can figure out what the book is. I'm super happy for everyone to have a book because I also think they're good. They're good books. So
they are good books.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you.